Chapter 3, Settlements, Alliances, and Resistance. Chapter 3, Section 1, The English Settle in North America. Richard Hakluyt was a proponent of mercantilism. Mercantilism is the idea that wealth is finite, and as one group gets wealthy, that means the other groups become poor or disadvantaged. Mercantilism values possession of materials rather than the trading of goods. The English also promoted colonizing North America for two reasons: to gain profit through mercantilism, and as a military base versus Catholic Spain, who had also started colonizing the Americas. To begin colonies, the English created joint stock companies like the Virginia Company and the Massachusetts Bay Company, who would invest in colonies and share the profits, but also split any loss, which helped minimize the risk of investments and encourage people to invest. Many of the early people colonizing North America for the English spent time trying to find minerals to seek profit, while the investors began advising settlers to build permanent settlements rather than seek quick fortunes. Jamestown, Virginia. King James I, who's pictured on the left, wanted to begin colonization of North America after taking the throne. In 1607, 105 settlers moved from England to what would become known as Jamestown, Virginia. These settlers chose an unhealthy location with a terrible water supply, and by 1608, only 38 of the original 105 settlers were still alive. Initially, settlers were looking for valuables instead of creating stable lives. John Smith changed that with his rule, being that if you don't work, you don't eat. The settlers at Jamestown endured the starving time of 1609 to 1610 until Lord de la Warr showed up with a year's worth of supplies. In the 1620s, John Rolfe developed a profitable strain of tobacco, and although Powhatan had helped the English by trading supplies, by 1620, the English settlers realized that Native American land was more valuable to them than the Native Americans themselves. The English needed room to grow tobacco, and their focus began shifting to agriculture. Plymouth, Massachusetts. The Pilgrims were a separatist group who wanted to separate from the Anglican Church or Church of England. At first, the Pilgrims moved to Holland or the Netherlands before moving to North America. They received permission from the king to settle in Virginia, but ended up in Massachusetts. The Pilgrims then founded Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620. Realizing they arrived in the wrong spot, they knew they needed to agree upon a set of rules. The Pilgrims then wrote and signed the Mayflower Compact as a form of self-government, the first form of self-government for the English colonies. Europeans had been fishing off the coast of North America for many years, and Native Americans like Samoset had learned the English language. Samoset was sent by the chief, Massasoit, to greet the English. The English, upon arriving at Plymouth, were not ready for winter, as they had missed the planting season to grow crops. William Bradford, who was the governor of Plymouth, Massachusetts, made a pact with Massasoit in order to survive. Squanto, a Native American, taught the Pilgrims how to fish and plant crops to aid their survival. Boston, or the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Pictured on the left is John Winthrop, the man who would become governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. John Winthrop promoted the idea of the Massachusetts Bay Colony being a city upon a hill and living by the Puritan way. Puritans were different than Pilgrims. Remember, the Pilgrims wanted to separate completely from the Church of England or the Anglican Church. Puritans, however, wanted to purify the Anglican Church. In 1630, the Puritans started what became known as the Great Migration, a 10-year period of mass Puritan migration from England to North America. They formed a permanent, self-governing colony at Massachusetts Bay. Church membership was the center of Puritan life at Massachusetts Bay. Later, they'd add the Halfway Covenant, which allowed non-practicing members of the Puritan Church, where non-practicing members of the Puritan Church could have their children baptized to become part of the church community. Puritans began branching out from Massachusetts Bay. In 1636, Roger Williams established the colony of Rhode Island. In Rhode Island, Roger Williams established the separation of church and state and the freedom of religion. In 1637, Thomas Hooker left Massachusetts Bay and established Connecticut, where they formed a self-governing pact called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. Maryland. Maryland was different from the Jamestown in Virginia and Massachusetts Bay in Massachusetts because of the fact that Maryland was a proprietary colony instead of being funded by joint stock companies. George Calvert, who's pictured on the left, became the first Lord Baltimore and proprietor of Maryland, meaning that he was the owner of this colony. Maryland was founded specifically for Catholics. Catholics were being persecuted in England, so they were given an opportunity to move to Maryland for their safety. Maryland used what was called the headright system to attract new settlers. The headright system would give 100 acres of land to first-generation settlers and 50 acres of land to second-generation settlers. Like Virginia, Maryland's economy would be based on large-scale growth of tobacco, otherwise known as a cash crop. In 1649, Maryland granted freedom of religion for all Christians. In 1661, they established laws governing slavery. New York. New York was originally colonized by the Dutch in two locations: Fort Orange in 1624, which is present-day Albany, New York, up the Hudson River from New York City, and New Amsterdam in 1626, which is Manhattan. The Dutch used what they called the patroon system, or patroons, to populate their colony. Patroons were people who were given huge tracts of land to bring new settlers. The Dutch were also big in the African slave trade, and as a result, the colony of New York had the most Africans in North America in the 1600s. New York Harbor made the colony very valuable, so in 1664, the Duke of York, who was the commander of the English Navy, took New York from the Dutch. The Duke of York kept New York, but gave New Jersey to two of his political allies. Pennsylvania and Delaware. Pennsylvania was a proprietary colony founded in 1681 by William Penn, who was a member of the Society of Friends, also known as the Quakers. Quakers believed in peaceful trade with Native Americans. They saw men and women as more equal, and they were pacifists, meaning they were anti-war. The land given to William Penn to become proprietor of Pennsylvania was a repayment to William Penn's father for the restoration of King Charles II to the English throne. In 1681, Penn received the charter to found his colony. In 1701, the Charter of Liberties allowed 3 southern counties to elect their own assembly, and those 3 southern counties became the colony of Delaware. The Charter of Liberties also established elected legislature. Carolina. Just like Pennsylvania, Carolina was a proprietary colony that rewarded people for supporting King Charles II and reestablishing his position as King of England. Carolina was founded when King Charles II rewarded 8 of his friends with land. King Charles II set up a council with his friends on top, which resulted in a constructed social pyramid. Rice and indigo became early cash crops, and the economy in Carolina was based on farming and trade. The port of Charleston, pictured on the left, was great for trade and attracted many settlers from Barbados in the south. In 1729, the Carolina colony was divided into two colonies, North Carolina and South Carolina. Georgia. Georgia was founded by James Oglethorpe in 1733 as a colony for debtors, or people who were in debt or owed money in England. In England, people who owed money and couldn't repay that money typically went to prison. So moving to Georgia provided a fresh start for many of the people who were in debt. The English government liked the idea of the Georgia colony because it provided a strong buffer between Spanish Florida and other English colonies. So English colonists in the King's colonies, like the Carolinas and Virginia, would be protected from the Spanish to the south and the Spanish to the southwest by the area of Georgia. Georgia would go on to ban both Catholics and Africans. Africans and indentured servants in England's colonies. John Rolfe's purchase of African slaves in 1619 marks the beginning of slavery in what would become the United States. Slavery was the economic foundation of the South, and the first settlers, though they found no gold, were able to find profitable plants like tobacco that you see pictured on the left. Southern slaves typically worked in the fields, while Northern slaves worked in people's homes and or on the docks or wharves of sea and river ports. Indentured servants were people who had plantation owners or business owners pay for their transport to the British North American colonies. Indentured servants then worked off their travel debt and would eventually become free. 3.1 Review. Please pause your video now and take a few minutes to answer the 3 review questions about Section 1.